Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in 1 minute. Good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited to have you here today. We are presenting in partnership with the Hassenfeld Children's Hospital at NYU, with the New York City Regional Center for Autism Spectrum Disorders, and with Advocates for Children. I'm Dr. Lauren Donnelly. I'm joined here today by Diana Aragundi from Advocates for Children, and we are presenting on navigating the special education journey in New York City, specifically talking about key transitions and resources for success in grades K through 12. And this workshop is brought to you in partnership, like I said, with all three agencies. It's brought to you by the New York State Regional Center for Autism Spectrum Disorders at the Child Study Center at Hassenfeld Children's Hospital at NYU Langone, and with Advocates for Children. We just want to note that the content of this presentation is informational and not clinical advice. So let me tell you a little bit about Diana. So Diana Aragundi is the Assistant Director of the Immigrant Students' Rights Project at Advocates for Children of New York, better known as AFC, where she works with immigrant students and families on a variety of school-related issues. Ms. Aragundi represents immigrant students and parents in special education administrative hearings, helps parents enroll their children in effective English language learner ELL programs, and assists older immigrant youth in finding appropriate school placements. Prior to joining AFC, Ms. Aragundi was a trial attorney at the Children's Law Center, representing children in custody, guardianship, family offense, and neglect proceedings. Ms. Aragundi earned her BA degree from NYU and her JD from the City University of New York School of Law, CUNY Law. Ms. Aragundi is an adjunct professor at CUNY Law, where she teaches a course on special education and the law. Ms. Aragundi serves as secretary of the New York City Bar Association's Education and Law Committee.
Thank you, Lauren. And I'm happy to be here today. I'm also going to now present Dr. Lauren Donnelly. Lauren is the clinical director of the Autism Spectrum Disorder Research and Clinical Program and clinical associate professor at the Child Study Center at Hassenfeld Children's Hospital at NYU Langone. She received her doctorate in school psychology from Teachers College, Columbia University. She completed her clinical internship at the University of North Carolina School of Medicine and a postdoctoral fellowship in ASD and neurodevelopmental disorders at the Seaver Autism Center for Research and Treatment at Mount Sinai. Dr. Donnelly's additional areas of clinical interest include identification and assessment of autism, as well as inpatient and hospital interventions to improve the medical experience for autistic youth. Let's continue.
Thanks so much, Diana. We're really excited to be with you today and to talk about the special education journey in New York City. Just some housekeeping items. If you have any questions for us, please put them in the Q&A and then we will address them at the end of the session. And we'll try to address as many as we possibly can within this hour. We have a lot of content to get through. So today we are going to be talking about special education, really an understanding around that and what the special education process is within New York City. We are focused on New York City public schools. In charter schools, they have the same rights, but they operate a bit differently. So just to focus our attention today, we're really focused on New York City public schools. We'll talk about the IEP. We'll talk about different services and programs that are available for students in K through 12, and then really what to do when we need more support, when a student isn't making progress or when parents need some additional help. So our learning objectives today are to understand the purposes of an IEP, to identify the steps necessary to request a special education evaluation through the Department of Education in New York City, and to understand parental rights during a Committee on Special Education or CSE meeting. So Diana, what is special education?
Thank you, Lauren. And I just wanted to address one of the questions that we got. Yes, the slides will be provided. We will be sharing the information as well as the recording. So don't worry if you don't capture everything while we're talking. You will have access to this information. So special education is a set of services and programs that are offered to students with disabilities. And the services should be designed to help students make progress every year. We want to make sure that students are making meaningful academic progress, social emotional progress every school year. You can see some examples here of different types of services that a student may receive at school, speech therapy, perhaps occupational therapy, physical therapy, and also different types of learning supports. We're going to talk about Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act first. And this is essentially outlaws discrimination based on disability. And so it's important to note that for families who perhaps the student requires some type of accommodation in the school, they have a physical or mental impairment, perhaps they need a wheelchair and they need support. They need a school that's accessible. They need support to be able to get into classroom or into the gym. They can benefit from a Section 504 plan. And these rights also apply to parents. And accommodations go into a 504 plan. Often enough, we have students who may benefit from a 504 plan and they don't necessarily need to have an IEP to receive supports in the classroom. Some of the examples that we include below on the bottom of the slide include supports such as testing accommodations, nursing services, if a child has a seizure and requires a nurse to be on a bus with them, physical modifications, and again, supports in the classroom, which can be large printed textbooks or preferential seating. So this can really be a lot of different ways of being creative and supporting students who may not necessarily require an IEP to do, to be able to access their learning, but still need support in the school, in the classroom. We're also going to be talking about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or the IDEA, which I think a lot more people are familiar with. And the IDEA essentially says that all children through the age of 21 who have a disability have the right to, and we're going to talk about it, a free, appropriate public education. You may also hear it as a FAPE, and they have a right to a FAPE in the least restrictive environment, which is also known as the LRE. So this is important to note because a lot of the students that we work with, a lot of the students that the children that you may have that you either know or your own child may have an IEP program. They are covered, and they're entitled to supports and services because of this federal framework, the IDEA. So it's important to know that these are the things that we're looking at when we're thinking about the rights to services and special education programs in public school.
And we've talked about an IEP, but what is an IEP? An IEP is an individualized education program. And when someone has an IEP as a preschooler, all individuals that are preschoolers are classified as a preschool student with a disability. For students who are in kindergarten or above and who are found eligible for an IEP, then they're classified under one of 13 classifications. So all of the classifications are listed here. One of those is listed on the IEP, and it is really important to note that classifications are not diagnoses. These are really where the greatest support need is within the school. And the disability, in order to apply for an IEP, really must adversely affect a child's educational performance in order to receive that qualification. So we have 5 steps that we're going to dive into in the special education process. So we have a referral, we have consent, parental consent, then we have evaluations that might be done by the school or outside of the school. Then we have an IEP meeting to determine what the student's educational placement is, what related services they have, and then ultimately they receive that placement and services. We're going to dive into all of these, and it's important to note that all of this takes place over 60 school days. So the school must do this within 60 school days from the time of referral and consent through placement. So, Diana, what do we do if a parent's concerned?
Great. Thank you, Lauren. So yes, the initial steps, and this if a parent is concerned, or if a school is concerned, right? Here we're speaking directly about parents or legal guardians, but a school can also, school staff can also make a referral for a student to be evaluated for special education services. But if a parent is concerned that their child may not be making the appropriate academic progress, or there's something, that they're worried that they are falling behind, they can definitely ask for a special education, initial evaluation for special education. The referral should be done in writing. There doesn't have to be any magic words. It can literally, the letter can be very, very simple. I would like my child, name of the child, birth date, evaluated for special education services. Usually we ask parents to put a little bit more information so that the school, the CSE, whoever's evaluating the child understands why the parent's concerned. So if you're concerned about occupational, the fine motor skills, if you're concerned about speech and language, articulation difficulties, noting those concerns can help address what type of initial evaluations the student undergoes. You're going to send that letter to the principal, the school-based support team, or the committee on special education, depending on where, if your child is already enrolled in a public school. We remind families to make a copy if they're able to send it electronically through email. That's always best, or so that you have records that you've sent that request. And I always remind families to follow up about a week after you submitted that request. The school must refer a child for an evaluation if they think the child has a disability. This is called the child fine obligation. So even though a parent has the right to ask for an evaluation, a school must refer the child. And then within 10 school days of the referral, the school must ask the parent for consent to evaluate. It's important to understand that what you're consenting to and what you're signing, the consent form is only for the evaluation. You're not consenting for special education services or a program. It's just so that the evaluation can take place, and consent must be written. It must be voluntary and informed. And you can take your consent away at any time if you change your mind, if you don't think it's appropriate. We included information by email, or you can also call 311 if, unfortunately, if you're not hearing back from school staff or you've submitted your request and you're still waiting. Definitely email the special education at schools.nyc.gov. I would document all your efforts to reach out to the schools. Schools are pretty responsive, but if you're finding you're having trouble, definitely that's one way to go.
Okay, so what does that evaluation look like? So this is an evaluation that the Department of Education completes that is really to see if someone is eligible for special education services within the DOE. And it includes 4 components. So we have a social history, and that it's really a conversation between a social worker and a caregiver, where a caregiver can address current concerns. They're going to be asked questions about developmental history, about family composition, who lives at home, and if it's the parent that's asking for the evaluation, also why that parent is asking for the evaluation. In terms of the psychoeducational component, that's an interaction with the student and typically includes a cognitive assessment or IQ assessment, as well as academic assessments, taking a look at reading, writing, math, their abilities across different educational domains. There's also a classroom observation that occurs and a recent physical. The recent physical can be from the pediatrician within the last school year. I also want to note that if a parent does note that there are other issues that they want an assessment of, those areas should be explored as well. For example, if they are interested in having language evaluated because of speech concerns, then that should be part of the evaluation. If there's fine motor concerns, then there should be an occupational therapy part of the evaluation. And this is really all part of that initial evaluation when someone is getting first evaluated to see if they qualify for that IEP. I also want to note that parents have a right to see the report, to see this evaluation before the IEP meeting. And that's something that can be really helpful for caregivers in preparing for a meeting. Evaluations by the schools are free. We said that they must be done within 60 days of the time that we give that permission, that caregivers give that permission. They must be done in the student's native language. So if the student uses another language other than English, then they must be bilingual evaluations. And if someone qualifies for an IEP, they are going to get evaluated every 3 years, but the school can also evaluate someone up to once a year. So there's also the possibility of receiving evaluations from outside of the DOE. So families can choose to pursue these additional evaluations. So they can ask the DOE for an independent assessment authorization that will give them the funds to get an evaluation by a DOE approved evaluator. They could also choose to pursue a private evaluation on their own at their own expense or go through insurance. So they could completely do that separate of the DOE. And when someone is getting an assessment through an approved evaluator or through a private evaluation, they can get a formal diagnosis in that process. So if someone is coming to us and having a psychological, psychiatric evaluation, they can receive a formal diagnosis. And if you'll remember, the 13 classifications that might be on a student's IEP are a classification and not a diagnosis. These evaluations also all give recommendations for treatment, for education, and usually include a feedback with the evaluator to really help families, a student understand the results and then sort of understand where to go from there. I do just want to mention that if there is a private evaluation and you want the school to consider services and placement, then a family would need to share the report with the school. It's also really important that we are working with clinicians who have experience working with schools. Specifically, if you're in New York City, you probably want people that have experience with New York City schools so that they can appropriately advocate within this space. I do just want to mention what typically goes into an evaluation, both for kids that are under kindergarten age and for kids that are school age. So before kindergarten, these evaluations might be called slightly different, might have slightly different names. We call it a neurodevelopmental evaluation at the Child Study Center. And this typically includes a developmental interview with a caregiver. It's going to include cognitive assessments, language assessments, adaptive assessments, taking a look at activities of daily living. It might include academic achievement. It will also include behavioral observations. That might be in the clinic. It might also include a school observation or an observation outside of the clinic, as well as diagnosis-specific assessments. So this battery is really created by the clinician based on the presenting concerns. And for both the neurodevelopmental evaluation as well as for school-age children for a neuropsychological evaluation, this is a combination of direct work with a child, caregiver interview, of observation, typically across different settings, record review, rating scales that might be done by caregiver, teachers, by the student, and might also include teacher or collateral interviews as well. So all of that is true for neuropsychological testing for school-age children as well. Again, we have a caregiver interview that is focused on getting that developmental history, getting any psychiatric concerns, understanding those concerns, as well as why they're coming for an evaluation. Again, we're going to do cognitive and language assessments. Again, we'll have behavioral observations and diagnosis-specific assessments. We'll have academic assessments to see if there's any learning concerns to be aware of. And then we're also going to take a deep dive into a student's executive functioning, their attention, memory, to really take a look at their functioning within those areas. We'll take a look at their emotional functioning, motor skills, and adaptive skills as well. And the purpose of this really comprehensive battery is to take a deep dive into areas of concern, but also to really outline a student's strengths and areas that they might be having challenges in to make the appropriate recommendations. Okay, so now we're getting to step 4, the IEP meeting.
Great, yes. And so now we've talked about the initial step, right? You asked for the evaluation, you signed the consent form. Dr. Donnelly discussed all the different ways that you can get evaluations, private evaluations, evaluations funded by the Department of Education, and also DOE evaluations. And now we are at the IEP meeting. The eligibility determination meeting, so generally when it's an initial referral, if this is a child's first evaluation to determine if they're eligible for special education services, it's entirely possible that the Department of Education will find that the student is not eligible for services, so the school may not call it an IEP meeting. So when you are talking to the team, you want to understand if a meeting is being held, what that meeting is. Are we going to talk about the evaluations and the assessments, and determine if the child qualifies or doesn't qualify for an IEP. Even if the child does not qualify for an IEP, there should still be a meeting held to discuss what the findings are of the report. The school psychologist should be there to have that conversation with the family and the essentially the IEP team there should be there to discuss that. So to backtrack, an IEP meeting is a meeting to discuss the needs of the student, right? So, and the parent is an integral part of the IEP team. So your voice matters here. The parent is usually the person who knows the child the best. And it's important to participate in these meetings. Since the pandemic, a lot of these meetings are virtual, but you have a right to ask when possible to do these meetings in person, depending on the school's availability. So
And
yeah, go ahead.
I want to just backtrack for 1 second as well, and Diana, jump in here. So if a family decides on their own, outside of the DOE, decides to independently get an evaluation, it is their choice if they want to share that evaluation with the school. If they are advocating for school placement, for services, that's where a discussion comes in with the clinician about sharing the evaluation with the school. Now, Diana, what happens if the DOE is the one who contracts to get that evaluation? At that point, then the DOE would see that evaluation, correct?
Correct. Yes. So as Lauren mentioned before, with independent assessment authorizations or independent educational evaluation assessments, if the DOE has funded those evaluations, the DOE will have a copy of those evaluations. The clinician has to provide them a copy. So you do, and most of the times, most parents want the DOE to have a copy of those assessments, but it's quite different from a private evaluation where you do not have to share. If for whatever reason you don't feel comfortable sharing the information, you don't think that it is indicative or appropriate of what the child's skills and strengths are, or you're worried that perhaps there's something in the evaluation that will, skew the perspective in terms of what the child's abilities are in the classroom. So definitely it's something to consider when you're determining whether to do a private assessment or an evaluation funded by the Department of Education. Sometimes you don't have a choice, especially if it's an initial evaluation. The DOE may be conducting their own assessments, but it's something to think about as your child goes through the process, and especially as we're talking about these transition points. And yes, we can go on to the next slide. This is essentially just the people who are at this meeting, right? We have the parent or parents, and both of them can be there. The parent can also invite someone, an advocate, the child's therapist, if the child has a provider that is important to discuss the child's academic or social emotional state. A special education teacher, the district representative, which is the person who represents the Department of Education. Sometimes it's a school psychologist, sometimes it's a teacher. It's usually not a separate person, and it can change year to year depending on when this is an annual IEP meeting, or if this is an IEP meeting where they're reviewing an evaluation. The school psychologist. School psychologist is generally only present when we're discussing evaluations. If you are providing the DOE with a private evaluation, you want to ensure that you're sharing, that you're asking for the school psychologist to be present so that they can interpret the assessment. If not, it's unlikely that you will see changes to the program or placement if the school psychologist isn't present. And they're always present at the first IEP meeting when the services are being included or added if the students is found eligible for an IEP. But then at annual IEP meetings, they're typically not present. A general education teacher, the student, if they are 14 and above, are generally invited to attend. I will stress that I tell parents sometimes IEP meetings can be very, very long, 1 to 2 to 3 hours. So sometimes I just ask for the student to be present for a short period of time and then sent back to class where they belong. But they have a voice, and they should be able to join the meeting as the parent sees fit. And then we also included interpreters because if the parent requires an interpreter, they should be provided with a qualified interpreter. Yes, we can continue on. So what is an IEP? An IEP, we want to think about it as a legal document. Think about it as a contract. And what that means is what's in the IEP, what is recommended, the services, the programs, that all those things, when the school does not provide the student with what's in the IEP, there is a way for the family to seek relief, right? And this can be whether the family sues through an impartial hearing process, whether the family seeks makeup services. The student is entitled to everything that the IEP says. So it's important to think about it in those ways. The IEP is individualized. It should describe the student. It shouldn't describe another student. The information should be very specific to the student and the services that he or she need to make meaningful academic progress. It should be created at the IEP meeting with the IEP team, including the parent. What this means is it shouldn't be discussed ad hoc by other people, sometimes calling the parent a few weeks before, telling them, I don't think we're going to include this service. No, the decision should be made at the IEP meeting, and the parent should be included in the conversation. All the services and programs, as I shared before, must be given to the student. And we're going to talk about what happens when those services are unfortunately not available. And it's good for 1 year, which means we're doing this annual review where we're discussing where the student is. Are they making meaningful academic progress? So we're briefly going to go through sections of the IEP. If you've read an IEP, you're familiar with these sections, but there's always an identifying information section, which just has a student's name, their a New York City ID information, their birth date. Then there's a section where it's the present levels of performance. How is a student doing? Are there assessments? Are there current assessments? I always told parents to review that section because sometimes the information is not updated. That's a problem. That's a point of concern. Are there progress reports provided to the family? The school should be submitting quarterly progress reports of the student to the family. And then there's also a section on the recommended special education program and services. We're going to talk about the different programs that are available, but every IEP has the program and has the related services if the student requires them on the IEP. There's also a section for a coordinated set of transition activities. This typically involves students who are 12 plus. For some students with disabilities, the age can be as low as 12. Mostly, you're going to see this more for our high school age students. And we want this information to be as detailed as possible. We're going to go into that a little later, but we really want these activities to be as detailed as possible, as clear as possible, so that we understand what supports the students getting so that they can start thinking about post-secondary success. Whether the students participating in state and district-wide assessments, are they on alternate assessment and not participating in state and district-wide assessments? Sometimes parents don't know if their children are alternately assessed. It's important to check that section of the IEP. The opportunities to interact with non-disabled students, and then again, the placement and program, which is usually where we all go to search first.
Related services, as we said, would also be on the IEP. So related services are supports such as speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, counseling, nursing, and others. Students need to be provided with all related services that are listed on their IEP by the school. The school is really required to provide those services to students, and sometimes students, we find out, are not receiving services because of a variety of reasons within the school. For example, the school might not have a occupational therapist, and occupational therapy might be on a student's IEP. The provider might not have the ability to provide the space in their schedule for the student, or sometimes someone is not available to provide the service in the language that is required for the student. So then, when a child is not receiving a related service at the school, a caregiver can ask for an RSA, which is a related service agreement. So this is issued by the school or the Committee on Special Education. This is really for when, as we said before, when the school is not providing those services, those related services for any of these reasons or possibly for other reasons. This could also include a form to request transportation, to request reimbursement to and from the service. And the family can ask for a list of DOE approved providers that accept related service agreements. And they can go through that list to try to find providers that might be providing the service that the school is not providing. So they can contact the providers on that list. Now, it is important to note that this is something that the school should be providing, and the school should be providing as many of the services as possible that are listed in a student's IEP within the school. And if a family is having trouble finding a provider, or if they haven't been able to find a provider, the onus for providing those services is still on the school.
Okay, great. So sorry, just trying to answer. Everyone has so many questions, which is great. Trying to answer as many questions as possible.
Now, this is
In the
helpful because while I'm sharing the screen, I cannot see the
Yes,
questions.
yes,
So
yes.
thank you,
So,
Diana.
Lauren, feel free to jump in there. But yeah, there's a ton of questions, which is great. That means you all are super engaged with us today. So we've gone through the different steps. We're at the final step, which is services. If the student is found eligible for an IEP, we'll begin. And what that means is we talked about the 60 school days. It's not 60 calendar days, which sometimes is challenging because we have holidays, we have weekends, we have the summer. So just keep an eye out on those days. And even though that is what's required, often that deadline we're looking outside that deadline. So it's just something to be important and to keep track of, because we do want things to be as timely as possible. So if the student has a disability, the IEP team creates the IEP with the family, and then the student should be start to receive the services. There is an implementation date on the IEP, which says when the IEP is set to be implemented. It's generally a few weeks after the IEP meeting. And for example, it can be ICT, right? Integrated co-teaching classroom with speech language therapy, the frequency, individual service or group service. All these steps should happen within 60 school days, as I said before. And now we're going to talk about the continuum of services. You can pull all that up, Lauren. Yes, we were doing some fun some fun graphics. So we're going to talk about the continuum of services that are available for students. The language that we're using here of restrictive is a language that the Department of Education uses. So we're using it for those purposes because you may hear a team member talk about a restrictive placement versus a less restrictive placement. But sometimes we like to think of them as more supportive, right? So is this a more supportive placement for your child? But in terms of restrictive, it just means more restrictive because the student is now, as we're going down the continuum, perhaps they're only interacting with students with disabilities. So that is where the language comes from. So when we think of least restrictive, it's a general education classroom with supports and services. So a student in a general ed classroom where students generally don't have IEPs, but they may be pulled out to receive speech or OT or perhaps SETS, which is special education teacher support services. That's the least restrictive. Then we're going more restrictive. We've already talked about ICT. ICT, the model is generally one special education teacher, one general education teacher. And in that classroom, you don't typically have more than 40% of the students who have IEPs. So this is an opportunity for students to have the benefit of two teachers in a classroom with students who do not have disabilities. And then as we're going down the continuum, we have a more supportive classroom, which is a special class in a community school. So when we're thinking of districts 1 through 32, sometimes you'll hear people, DOE staff call it self-contained. In that classroom, those are the ratios. In that classroom, all the students have IEPs, and there's in that ratio, 12 students, one teacher. When we see a +1, it's plus a paraprofessional for the class to provide support for the class. So as you can imagine, these are students who have perhaps have more needs and need a lot more intensive support from the teacher. 15:1 is the ratio for high school. When we talk about that middle school, high school transition, it's something to keep a note of because sometimes that change is not made, and then that creates a lot of chaos for families when we're going from a special class in 8th grade to a special class in high school, and then we don't have the placement for the student. Um, More supportive, we're thinking of District 75 inclusion programs that are in a community school, and these are special programs. A lot of students with ASD may benefit from these programs because they have the support of being in a District 75 placement, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but also interacting with non-disabled peers who are in a community school. And so, yes, so we're going to continue talking about, we're going down the continuum. Now we're talking about District 75, which a lot of you may be familiar with. This is a, a, a district where every student in the district, in the school, has an IEP. Generally, when you have students in District 75, they have more severe needs. We have students who perhaps are nonverbal and require a lot more support day to day. As you can see, these ratios are a lot more, there's a higher teacher and paraprofessional ratio to student. So we have 8:1:1, which is 8 students, 1 teacher, 1 para, but we also have 12:1 plus 4, which is 12 students, 1 teacher, 4 paraprofessionals. So it's always important, the decision to place a student in District 75 should never be taken lightly. It should really be because a student is having a lot of trouble interacting with students in a district's 1 through 32 classroom. It may not be the right fit if they need a lot more support. So it's definitely something to think about, but sometimes it is the right fit for some students. And then as we're continuing on, we're going to talk about state-approved non-public schools. These are schools that are approved by the New York State Education Department. And for a lot of students with learning disabilities, with speech and language disorders, with emotional disabilities, these schools can provide a lot of support. They're considered more restrictive by the Department of Education because the entire school is a school for students with disabilities. They're, and the student is exiting, right? They're no longer in a public school and receiving that type of intervention. That being said, a great NPS could be really supportive with students who are cognitively like-minded, similar profiles, and really provide a lot of students with a lot of support. Then we're talking about residential placements, where the student lives at the school. And then finally, most restrictive home instruction, which is really should be used sparingly. Typically, it's for students who've either had an injury or cannot attend school for that reason, or they may have psychiatric needs that require them to stay home. But this really should be a temporary measure. I know we blazed through that, but I think Lauren's going to talk to you a little bit about the ASD programs that are available in DOE schools.
We're going to blaze through a few other things. Let's talk about some of those autism programs that are available through the New York City Department of Ed. So there's 3 different specialized programs that are available. The first 2 that are listed on this slide are schools that are in community, are classrooms that are in community schools. So the Autism Nest program is an ICT classroom. That's that integrated co-teaching class that Diana was referring to before, that has a general education teacher and a special education teacher. And these ICT classes are typically a little bit smaller, where the students that have an IEP have a classification of autism. This is a appropriate placement for students who are autistic, who are at or above academic grade level, and they are going to get some additional supports in terms of their social emotional skills. The NEST program has a special social curriculum that's called the Social Development Intervention Program, SDI. And all of the students that are in that program are going to get some of those extra supports, and the teachers have been trained to support their social communication as well. The Autism Horizons program is also within a community school, and this is a smaller class that's an 8-to-1-to-1. So it's 8 students, 1 teacher, and 1 paraprofessional. And this is for students who are near grade level in terms of their academics, and they're going to get additional supports in this smaller setting that are specialized for autistic students. These can be really great programs for students, but the seats, the space within these programs are limited, and families, students need to apply for these programs directly. The IEP team at their school cannot just recommend an autism program for a student. There's an application. So to apply, you can go to the website that is on this slide. And this is the same application for both of these programs. It's pretty straightforward. The only caveat is that there does need to be an autism assessment. So that is something that needs to be included in that evaluation. And families can use outside evaluations as well. There's also the AIMS program, and this is a specialized program that was originally developed for D75 schools and has since expanded as well to a couple of other districts. This is really for younger students. So autistic students who are in kindergarten, first and second grade. And this is a smaller classroom for students with higher support needs. So there's 6 students, 1 teacher, 1 paraprofessional in terms of the class ratio. And this is really to support autistic students who have higher needs in terms of their language needs, their adaptive needs, their academic skills. And these classrooms are based upon ABA principles. So ABA is applied behavior analysis. And there's BCBAs, so that's board certified behavior analysts, so people that provide ABA and that are trained in ABA that are supporting the staff. There's a separate application for the AIMS program, and it also includes a clinical observation and an informal language assessment. So Diana, tell us about
Great.
some of these other schools.
Yeah, so we did talk about some of the different options, and now we're going to talk about state-approved non-public schools, which I shared a little bit about before when we were talking about the continuum of services, and non-approved non-public schools. So a state-approved non-public school, as I said before, it's been approved by the New York State Education Department, and it meets and follows certain state standards and regulations. And so how do we get this placement? If a parent thinks that there's a state-approved non-public school that's right for their student. One way is to get that recommendation on the IEP. So that is generally a 2-step process. The IEP team would have to convene an IEP meeting and agree to defer the student to the central-based support team. And usually that can be a little challenging because the IEP team may not agree with the parent or may think that the community school can provide the student with the supports. So generally a neuropsych really helps when it recommends a more supportive placement because a lot of times, for example, students with severe learning disabilities or specific learning disorders may require different types of instruction or speech and language disorders than a community school can provide. So sometimes having that neuropsych and having that evaluator present can help, convince the school that central-based support team is the right thing. And then the second part of that process is identifying the school if you haven't, and then visiting and having the student accepted. So that is one way. Not to say it's easy, but it is a method. Another way is a P1 or a Nickerson letter. This is generally when the Department of Education has failed to provide the program or placement that's recommended on the student's IEP. So as I mentioned before, when we think of those transition points, middle school to high school, if your child was recommended for a 12-to-1 for ninth grade because someone made a mistake, right? Or they were recommended for, they went from being on ICT to going to a special class, so self-contained, and no school location letter was sent to the family. No information was sent. The family does have recourse of a Nickerson letter if the school year is starting. So typically we're thinking about September 5th, right? If I reached out to the schools for a lot of my students at the end of August saying, they have not received school location letters despite program changes happening. So again, if the DOE failed to provide your student with a school location letter, then the family may be eligible for a Nickerson letter. That is a voucher for 1 year. So what that means is the family can if they identify a program at a state-approved non-public school, they visit, the program accepts your student, then they have this voucher for 1 year and they can attend. The tuition is covered. It does not mean that that's going to happen the following year. Um, the last recourse is to file an impartial hearing request, right? And the parents can file an impartial hearing request on their own. They can, consult with an attorney. They can hire an attorney, and then they have to, of course, win at the hearing. And then for non-approved non-public schools, you cannot put that on the IEP. They have not been approved by NYCED. These are private schools. And so the only recourse there is to file an impartial hearing request, and you're seeking reimbursement and win at the hearing.
I do just want to mention that there are schools that are state-approved non-public schools that do accept students with a classification of autism. And there's also schools that are really specifically to support some of the social communication needs of autistic students in terms of both of these categories here.
Okay, great. So I think yes, we're going to very briefly go. If you have a child who is learning English, right? They're an English language learner, and the recommendation on the IEP is for bilingual special education. So you would see it in the program. The language would be of instruction would say Spanish or French or Italian. They're eligible for bilingual special education. They should you can email the bilingual special education programs at schools.nyc.gov. I provide them a copy of the student's IEP and I ask for the placement. If a transfer is not possible, sometimes we don't have enough bilingual special education programs, then the child will be assigned someone who is an alternate language paraprofessional who will interpret for the child in class. Sometimes parents also think it's just not physically possible. Uh, the school is all the way in South Queens and the family lives in Washington Heights. The parent may choose to stay at their current school. The school will provide the student with an alternate language para, but it is something that you are eligible for if you choose to use it. We can go on to the next slide.
Yeah, so we're going to briefly talk about a case example. So, and this is a fabricated case example here, based on some of the things that we've seen families encountering as they are trying to get services within a school. So Daniel was diagnosed with autism at 3 years old. He's currently in the 3rd grade. He's been in a general education class, and he does not have an IEP. He does not have any special education services through the 3rd grade. And he's having trouble with fine motor skills that include writing. He's also struggling with the social emotional aspects of school. And his caregivers and his teacher are both concerned about his academic progress. So Diana, how would we approach this? And we're going to go on to the next slide here.
Sure. So, we have the information, right, that the student is now in 3rd grade, was evaluated at 3. I would want to know, have there been subsequent private evaluations? The student has an IEP, so it definitely has been evaluated by the Department of Education, is receiving some supports, but the family is concerned about academic, delays, and then also the social emotional component. So, I would be concerned about getting updated assessments. I see here we have, some more information where the student now has updated formal autism assessment, has an additional diagnosis of a developmental coordination disorder, and has these average cognitive abilities, which is great. That means the student has a lot of strengths and then, some challenges, and how do we provide, what the student currently has isn't working so much. So what can we do as advocates? One of the things is considering that autism nest program that Lauren mentioned before. I will note that, and a couple of people have noted it in the Q&A, there are long waiting lists and it's challenging. It is, again, it is an application process, and it doesn't mean that the child will necessarily be accepted, but it is something that the family can consider about applying. The family can also consider about adding, right, these related services. So whether it's OT, whether we're requesting counseling to talk about how to deal with some of the social emotional challenges that the student's experiencing. Are there additional assessments that can be provided? Are there different management needs that can be included in the classroom if the student is perhaps needing more breaks during the day, or maybe needs preferential seating? Like, how can we support the student even while we're submitting the application for autism for the ASD programs? Lauren, I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to chime in.
Yeah, so I think that a family can and a student can really work with their providers to think about what would the appropriate services be within their current setting, and then also what they're advocating for. So here we were giving the example that in the meantime, while Daniel is waiting, he might be in an ICT placement with getting those related services of OT, and maybe the family would request counseling. And then maybe for the next year, they're going to be in the Autism Nest program if they get that if they get accepted and put in that application. So now we're taking a look here, and let's say that it has been a year and the family is not seeing academic progress, and we want to take a look at what we do in terms of a reevaluation. Diana, are you there? I think you just,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes. Ooh. Yes, I am. Sorry, I meant to mute myself, and instead I turned the video off. And I also am mindful of the time. The time is running away from us. You will have access to all our information, but yes, if you are not seeing the progress, regardless of whether there is progress or not, a reevaluation, the Department of Education has an obligation to reevaluate your child at least once every 3 years. Parents can ask for the reevaluation at least once, at most once a year. Sometimes parents ask for it every year because they're not seeing the progress. But it's important to ask if the reevaluation is including new evaluations. If new assessments are being conducted, you will be asked to provide consent, which means you're giving permission for these assessments to be done. School staff can also request reevaluation, especially if they're seeing some of these challenges. And again, this is an opportunity to see if the program is continuing to work. Sometimes we need to have tweaks. Things need to change if the student is not making sufficient progress.
So as we talk about these transitions, I'm just wondering also if Angel and Lily, if you would be able to put into the chat for everyone the contact information for Advocates for Children, and also the New York City Regional Center contact information if folks do need to pop out right at 1:30. So in terms of these transitions, we have a couple of transitions between schools and between systems. So if we're going from a preschooler with eligibility for an IEP so it's CPSC, the Committee on Preschool Special Education, and then they are transitioning to kindergarten to school age to the Committee on Special Education, then the CPSC will refer a student to really determine at that transition point, sometimes it's called a turning 5 evaluation, if the student is eligible for school age special education. This typically involves a school observation. It might also include an updated It might also include an updated evaluation. And this meeting usually takes place in the spring before the student goes into kindergarten within the fall. And the team is then going to meet to sort of determine if the student meets eligibility to be in special education. They will figure out then if they do meet eligibility, which one of the 13 eligible classification categories the student's IEP will get changed to, and they'll figure out placement and related services for that upcoming year. In terms of the transition then to middle and high school, we always want to make sure that a student's new school can implement their IEP. So sometimes families participate in the process of applying to a middle school or applying to a high school, and they are using the IEP from the current year or from a prior year. But by the time the student goes into a new school, goes into that middle school or high school, their IEP has been updated. So we always want to make sure that the student's school can implement their IEP. We want to think about if the student's placement is changing, as Diana had mentioned. There's the possibility of changing classroom size, the number of students within a classroom. Maybe if a school doesn't have certain related services, then we're trying to get an RSA to get some of those services elsewhere. And we are going to also really be thinking a little bit more about testing accommodations that might be added to the IEP. These might be added in the later years of elementary school as well, but we all know that there's more tests that sometimes come up in middle school and high school, so we want to be thinking about that. As we said, starting at this age, a student might be involved in their IEP meeting, and as the entire team is developing goals that are on the IEP, we want to make sure that these goals are specific, that they are attainable, and sometimes these goals can include community and adaptive goals as well. When we're thinking about students after they are transitioning, after high school or after that 21, 22 years old, when they are aging out of the services, then we really want to be thinking about goals for after schooling. So we want to make sure we have updated evaluations. We want to make sure that we are taking a look at all post-secondary options, which is going to look different for different students. It might involve college, it might be vocational, it might be day hab, it might be looking at employment. And the team should really be developing goals and working with the student to prepare them for these different options. We can have school staff support an individual in accessing other services like OPWDD, the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities, that's in New York, and for vocational rehabilitation through Access VR. So we're always really thinking about how the school can help with that transition and support through those goals. Okay, what do parents have a right to?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. And it's important just to note that these transition points are really like I think one of the questions we had was about applying to ASC Nest and the delays with applications. We encourage families, if you're looking at applying to programs once you have a diagnosis, you can apply to the programs at any point, with the understanding that it might not coincide with middle school application process or the high school application process. But there are delays. There was a few questions about what to do um, if no one is responding. Definitely reach out to the school-based support team for assistance, the school for assistance, to contact the ASD office. But also our information is included. You can email us, and if we're able to, we will escalate the case for you and try to see what's going on. But a lot of these transition moments are key moments to keep an eye on things, and then also to try to prepare so that children have as much success as possible as they're navigating between these different like pivotal points. So yes, parents have a right to. Oftentimes parents don't know about all the rights they have. And so it's important to know that they have a right to say yes or no to special education. Sometimes parents are very passive during an IEP meeting. You're there to participate. So if you don't agree with a program recommendation, or you don't agree with a discussion about how the frequency of a service, you have a right to say that you don't agree. And I always recommend parents to ask for it to be included in the IEP if you don't agree with a change. It doesn't mean that the IEP is not going to go into effect. It just means that you may not agree with something, you want to keep it, you want to document it. You have a right to ask for new evaluations, including independent assessments, especially if you don't think that the DOE assessment was thorough enough, comprehensive enough. You want more information about something else. You have a right to ask for a new evaluation. You have a right to participate in IEP meetings. You have a right to get notice to participate in an IEP meeting, not just to be called the day before for the IEP meeting. You have a right to reschedule that, to receive an interpreter who speaks your language, and to receive translation of documents. And then to get notice if things are in writing, if things are changed before the school changes anything. The school should be holding an IEP meeting to change things. They shouldn't be waiving, and they shouldn't be changing anything without an IEP meeting. So if things are changing, if your child is telling you that they're no longer receiving a service that you know that they're supposed to receive, reach out to the school-based support team. And then very, very briefly, because I know we're out of time, who do you speak to when you need help? We always recommend talking to the teacher first. They are the ones who know your child the best. Speaking to the therapist or the provider, if you do not know who your child's provider is, this is what September is for, or the early October. This is when we get the contact information. Sometimes therapists go on leave, they go on parental leave, or they leave the school. You want to know if your child is missing services. The parent coordinator is a great person to talk to when you need access to things like NYXA, the New York Schools account, or when you need access to My Schools, or you're doing all these things. So they can really help connect you to these systems. Reaching out to the school psychologist when you're asking for assessments, when you're asking for following up about translation of documents, when you're asking about what's happening with the delays with your request. I always copy and I encourage parents to reach out and make sure that the principal, assistant principal are aware of these things, especially if you're finding that the other people I just mentioned are not responsive. I would also copy the principal or assistant principal on those messages. And then finally, well, not finally, but if you're not receiving the supports that you think you're asking the teacher, you're reaching out to the principal, people are not being responsive. These are people outside of the school that can help. The superintendent's office provides a lot of support through the family support coordinator. The borough offices, you can reach out to the special education administrator, the supervisor of psychologists. Again, if these are delays around assessments, delays asking for an IEP meeting. The translation and interpretation, things have changed a little bit. I encourage you to reach out directly to the school first. If you're asking for translation and interpretation, there's also a form online that you can ask for that. And the special education office, again, if you're having delays. And then yes, this is the form. I think some of you are familiar with it from the Q&A. The phone number before, the DOE now wants people to fill out that form for translation requests. I will remind you, sometimes it's just as easy to during the IEP meeting to ask for it. You won't get it immediately, but you will get it after a couple of weeks. It goes through a specific translation unit through the DOE, but it includes IEP, it includes evaluations. Families should be getting notices as well.
And I think that there's a lot of questions that are in the Q&A that really, I think one of the reasons that we have Diana here today and that we partner with Advocates for Children is because they have so many supports for New York City families. So Diana, you can speak to this more, but they have a helpline to answer questions that's available on Mondays through Thursdays at 10 to 4 to answer questions. And I believe, Diana, that everyone that is on that hotline speaks English and Spanish in terms of who's receiving that.
Yes. All our helpline specialists speak both English and Spanish, but we also have access to a language line, just like the DOE has actual access to a language line. So if you speak another language, you can call us. We will have an interpreter available to speak with you.
Yeah, so we just want to let everyone know about the Advocates for Children helpline, because this can be so incredibly helpful, as I think we see through the chat and through the number of people that are here. How many of you are advocating for a student's rights and their special education services, and how that can be really confusing and difficult to navigate. So I just want to let you know about this that's available. And as we said, this presentation was provided through our New York City Regional Center for Autism Spectrum Disorders at NYU at Hassenfeld Children's Hospital. And this is our email address. So if you have questions about some resources or services, this is our email address. And we can try to address maybe just a couple of questions. I know Diana has been answering a lot of those along the way. I think just questions that seem to be general questions. We will be giving out the information that's in the slides. So everyone that had signed up for the presentation will receive the handout with that information. So people were asking about some of the applications, and the links will be available. And those are links to the DOE websites. I think that
I
I
was
would
just
direct,
gonna, yeah,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt you. I was just gonna also flag that for those of you that I wasn't able to get to your question, I apologize. I tried to answer as many as I could, but you can also just email info@Advocates for Children. Put your question in, someone will respond with an answer. You can also like highlight that you were at this training. It may find its way to me, and I will definitely do try to answer your question. But we're trying to get to as many questions as possible. It was a little challenging, given, which is great given the response.
I think I'll briefly say that related services, if they are not associated, if they are just related services that a student needs, for example, occupational therapy, physical therapy, that is something that can be provided through a 504. If their placement is not changing and if they do not qualify for an IEP. Someone was also asking about some medical conditions, things like seizures, and that's something that should be addressed in the IEP meeting as well if there's special needs that are related to medical conditions. Diana, is there anything that that you want to jump in on here? I'm trying to just answer a couple general
Yeah,
ones.
no, I think that there were questions about, the 3-year mandated 3-year evaluation. Parents can ask for evaluations once a year. So, and even more so if there are other concerns that pop up. If the fine motor skills concern pops up or assistive technology concerns, you can ask for evaluations throughout the year, but not more than once a year for like, let's say you're asking for a cognitive or academic battery. Someone asked like if we could ask for assessments ahead of time before the 3-year evaluation. You're definitely within your right. You're also within your right to ask for independent assessments if you want a more comprehensive test. So like a neuropsych, you can ask for that. You can ask for a functional behavior assessment by a private provider if you think that, the FBA conducted by the DOE was not particularly comprehensive enough. So there are things that you can ask for. I encourage people again to go on our website too to look for guides that are very specific about, we have guides on Section 504, we have guides on special education and more discrete topics. But again, you can reach out to us at any point.
Yeah, I think some families or some individuals were asking if even if you're in a specialized program, do you get that evaluation every 3 years? And the answer is yes. For everyone with that IEP, they can receive that every 3 years. We know that there's challenges. We know that all of you are here because you're advocating. So we apologize for not being able to answer every single question, but we really thank you for your time and participation in this presentation, for being here today. So thank you, Diana, for joining me in this presentation. We wish everyone a really wonderful Tuesday.
Thank you.